Formuleetii warra ta'e keessallee kan hin jirre aadaa Oromoo keessa garuu kan jiru baay'eetu jira. Fakkeenya tokko isinii kaasuun barbaada. Aadaa Booranaa keessatti dubartiin tokko nan gudeedamee yookiin nan arrabsamee yookiin nan ifatamee akkasin ta'e jettee yoo baate dubbatte dubartii sanaan ka'iitii nama dhugaasii ba'u fidii hin jedhamtu. Akkuma akkasaatti akkuma ramadii jirutti nama hundumaatiif yookiin abbaa sana godhe sana ni adabama jechuudha. Kun seera biyyattiin qabdu biyyi Itoophiyaa yookiin biyyi lafaa hundumtuu qabu keessa hin jiru. Dubartiin tokko rakkadheeraa gudeedameeraa akkas ta'eera yoo jette she has to bring evidence formally. Aadaa Oromoo keessa garuu hin jiru. Kanaaf aadaan gurguddaan baay'een waan baay'ee irraa barachuu kan dandeenyu aadaa Oromoo keessa jira. Kara jandariis kara biyyaas jechuudha. Fakkeenyaaf Boorana baadiyyaa Booranaa keessa nan deema. I really feel safe more than walking on Addis Street. Aadaa Booranaa keessatti dubartiin kabajamtuudha. Karaarra yoo deemte namni itti bu'u hin jiru. Yoo ofiiseetii barbaaddee dubbiste malee namni kasumaan nama hin dubbisu. Magaalaa Finfinnee keessa yoo nama gadi ba'e nan beekan inni caammaa xaragus inni karaarra taa'us inni hundumtuu dubartii ta'uu koorraa qofa kan ka'e waa baay'ee naan jedha. Kanaaf aadaa gurguddaa baay'ee qabna. Aadaa keenya kanatti back to the origin. Nuun aadolii nuyi amma carraaksisaa jirru yookiin nama duwwaatu aadaa keenya cabse miti yookiin alagaa duwwaatu aadaa keenya cabse miti. Numtuu aadaa keenya kabajaa jirraayi. Aadaan keenya immoo maayinni blame shift gochuun nurra hin jiraatu. Ofirraa achi dabarsuu osoo hin ta'in of keessatti deebinee nullee aadaa keenya kabajaa jirraayi. Akka aadaan keenya jedhutti nurree bulaa jirraayi. Aadaan Oromoo akkuma sila jenne yookiin akka siiqee irratti ilaaltan wal qabatanii ce'uu, wal ijaaruu, walii wajjin jiraachuu, walii wajjiniin gaaras tabbas kan nutti dhufe hundumaa waliin dabarsuudha. Kana akkam goonee seera modernii ta'een ijaarree jaarmiyaalee keenyas haa ta'uu, political organizationis haa ta'uu, wanta ijaaruuf barbaannu yookiin akka kaleessa jedhame rakkoo guddaa nuyi qabnu jaarmiyaaleen Oromoo reprezentii godhan Oromoo hundumaa kan hiriirsuu danda'an Oromoon hundumtuu kan jaallatuuf kan barbaadu ijaaramuu qaba. Kana yeroo ijaarru immoo let's back to our origin. Let's back to our culture. Let's use the epistemology, the ideology of our culture. Kan isa fudhanna malee isa ergifannee qabnu kana akkamiin dhiisuu dandeenya. Isa jedhu kaasuuf hin barbaade galatoomaa hundi keessan.
Yaanni koo xinnoo boodatti waan na jalaa deebi'e natti fakkaate natti dhaga'amaayyuun dubbachuu barbaade. Dubartoonni keenya yookaan akka nigiste saabaa ta'uu qabu yookaan immoo Oromoo ta'uu qabu lamaan keessaa filannoon kan isaaniiti hin danda'ama. Yoo bilisummaa barbaanna ta'es bilisummaa kan jedhu kun yaada adda addaa qabaa konseptii bal'aatu jira achi keessaa. Anyways bilisummaan nan jaalladha. Bilisummaan of ta'uudha waan ta'eef dhiibbaa nama biraan qabu waan ta'eef nan jaalladha. Kan Oromoon bilisummaa barbaada yoo ta'e bilisummaan sun karaa dubartii dhufa malee karaa dhiiraan dhufuun eegina. Maaliif waan hunduu filannoon fuula keenya dura jira. Filannoon kan keenya garuu kanamoo kana ta'uun barbaadaan kan keenya. Maa inni dubartiin attamiin nu bilisoomsiti? Ilmaan guddiftii. Haadha maaliif cirfa abbaan gadaa fudhachuuf gaafa ga'u maaliif haadha cirfa jenne? Waan guddiftee kana nageessifteef galanni kan kee ta'uu jechuudha, galata galfachuudha waan isheen goote sanaaf. Haati ilmaan guddisti. Ilmaan guddatan kun kan isaan sirriitti guddatanii oromummaa fudhatanii guddachuu danda'an. Karaa haadhaati malee karaa abbaa miti. Abbaan yeroo hin qabu ilmaan biran taa'uyyuu ba'ee deema. Abbaan akka waaqaati, haati akka lafaati jedha Oromoon. Lafa jechuun yeroo hunda nu bira jira, waa hunda nuu kenna, waa hunda nuu biqilcha. Waaqni nurraa fagoodha. Garuu yaa waaq jenna bullee kaane. Haadha galatan galchinu ta'a. Sana booyuu hin qabane dubartoonni keenya. Ilmaan guddisuu qabu. Oromoo taasisanii, ilmaan Oromoo taasisanii, oromummaa isaanii tiksanii eeggatanii akka isaan guddatan gochuu qabu. Kanaaf duratti gaafa durbummaa, waa'ee durbummaa gaafan dubbadhu, virginiiti gaafan dubbadhu, walakkaan keessan kolfaa, walakkaan keessan maal jedhaa turtan? But it is an important issue to bring to that culture in enculturing children. Yoo dhugaadhuma oromummaa kan feenu ta'e waa'een filannoodha jedheera. Maal jechuudha sun? Oromummaan iddoo sanaa ka'ee namaaf sacrifice gochuu barbaada. Namaaf, uummataaf, waliif, waloodhaan dhaabachuu barbaada. Waloodhaan gaafa dhaabannu immoo of gatuu, of dagachuutu nurra jira. Of dagannee fedhii keenya, hawwii keenya, waan amma gojomaan, waan amma nutti tolu hunda dagannee dhaabachuutu nurra jira. Waan booriif, dhaloota booriif ijaaruun nurra jira jechuudha. Kan ammoo kan ijaaru dubartoota, dubartoonni immoo tokkoffaa mana isaanii keessa eeganii tiksanii ilmaan isaanii guddisuu, lammaffaa walii isaanii wal ijaaranii akkaataa itti ilmaan guddisuu qaban irratti illee waliin mari'achuu qabu. Akkaataa kanaa yoo deemne guddachuu, walaboomuu, ijaaramuu dandeenya jechuudha. Kanuman jechuu barbaada. Galatooma.
Just a quick response. I hope you're not saying we only have to be mothers or that's our most important role. Yes, we are mothers, but we are also thinkers and we are artists and we are scholars. These are doctors here. Yep, thank you.
Thank you. This is very important and exciting presentation. It's a really, a topic for seeking the holding glue in so many ways. Thank you. Thank you very much, our panelists. Our next topic, or what we are going to deal with, we have a guest speaker. I'm excited to invite Dr. Muhammad Hassan to come over and introduce our guest speaker that we are privileged to have here with us, Dr. Asmarum Laggase. So here is Dr. Muhammad.
Thank you, Dr. Samuel. I thank Ade Kulani for asking me to introduce a distinguished scholar who contributed so much to Oromo studies. I am talking about Professor Asmarum Laggase. He was born in Asmara in 1931. His early education was in Evangelical Church School in Asmara, headed by Welda Abba, Welda Mariam. Anyone who has an inkling for Eritrean history will clearly understand the importance of this man in terms of starting the struggle. During the Italian colonial occupation, schooling for Eritreans was prohibited beyond grade 4. When the British liberated Eritrea in 1941, they extended education to grade 6. When Asmarom completed his elementary education, his uncle, I hope I will not murder his name, Zarai Bekit, who was the head of extended family, was expelled from Eritrea by the British administration, suspected of involvement with Eritrea-Ethiopian unionist movement. He was banished to Ethiopia, and the rest of the family followed him. They took refuge in Desse, where they established a plantation in Ambasel Warada, or land grant that was granted to them by Emperor Haile Selassie. He, as Asmarom, and his elder brothers went to Addis Ababa and attended Tafari Mokonnen High School, where they received outstanding education by French-Canadian Jesuit teachers. Honestly, I was wondering how Asmarom became, spoke impeccable French language and wrote really impeccable in that language. I now, for the first time, understand where that came from. He was a member of the first graduating class from high school, which was not allowed to go to England or the United States for further studies because a university was to be opened in Addis Ababa. The students rebelled and they were sent to second-rate colleges in Africa and Asia. Thus, Asmarom ended at Makerere College in Uganda. There too, he became involved in a student rebellion against British colonial education and was expelled and returned to Ethiopia and attended the University College of Addis Ababa, where he graduated with BA in education. He then went to Harvard for his master's degree in education and his PhD in anthropology. He set out to do his dissertation on customary laws of Eritrea. He returned to Ethiopia and asked permission to do field work on that topic, and was told that the government would not allow an Eritrean to do field research in Eritrea at that critical moment in history. The year was 1961, which happened to be the year when the ELF began the 30-year-long campaign to liberate Eritrea, an event that was the source of anxiety in Addis. What was the source of anxiety for Ethiopian rulers turned out to be a blessing for Oromo studies, as you will see. Asmarom abandoned the Eritrean project and launched what turned out to be his lifelong project to unravel the rich, complex, and obscure nature of the Gada system, a quest that resulted in 2 publications, Gada 1973 and Oromo Democracy 2000. Based on this evidence, UNESCO recognized the Gada institution as intangible world heritage. Now he has published a second edition of Gada 2019, updating the old chapters of the first edition and adding 4 new chapters that reveal all the discoveries made in the last 4 decades, including the first archaeoastronomic site in Africa, linked to the Borana astronomical calendar dated to 300 BC. A discovery that opens a new phase in Oromo studies in connection with the Nile Valley civilization. That is Marawe and ancient Egypt. And if I may add, last week there was a conference at Jimma University. There was a Sudanese scholar who came there and presented on a remarkable similarity between the Nubian language. There are several Nubian languages. There is one particular language that had incredible similarity with the Oromo. And that Sudanese scholar is really exploring the connection between between the Oromo and the Nubians. And one cannot dismiss his findings as accidental, because the body parts he presented, the different parts of human body, the way the Oromo say and the way the Nubians say is strikingly similar. And this cannot be an accident. And probably in the future, we will hear more about this connection. Professor Asmarom Lagasa is going to talk to us about his new book, which is the topic of his presentation. Dear Professor, we are truly delighted to have you among us and you sharing your wisdom with all of us. And thank you. And we all wish you long, healthy, good life. Thank you. Okay, you're in business. Okay, we can get started. I'm really gratified and delighted to be in Finfinne and addressing an audience of interested Oromo scholars and colleagues to present what is essentially a new book that I've just finished. Just finished. It's actually on its way to Addis Ababa, and it's stuck in the messy Djibouti customs system. The book was received in Djibouti, and the company that's supposed to transmit it to Addis Ababa is shut down. So we literally have to take legal action to retrieve the book and then bring it to Addis. So for those who came from America for this conference, I have 500 books in my home in Philadelphia. So you can go ahead and buy the book and give me your exact address, and it will be mailed immediately to your home addresses. That much we can do. The rest of the shipment, 1,500 copies, will be liberated at some point in the next month or so. Okay, so the title of my talk is Gada and the Future of Oromo Democracy. Before I go into that, though, I'd like to give you a few impressions of my fieldwork by showing you the people who are most important to me during my fieldwork. This is Abba Jaldes Liban, who is the man who welcomed me to his village and allowed me to live in his village and said, you shouldn't live in a town like Negelli where they know nothing about Gada. You come and live with us. And so he gave me two of his assistants to show me to his village. And they had to lead me with a hand axe, which they used to clear the forest as we traveled to the village, and a flashlight. And it took us 5 hours to get to the village. By the time we arrived, the village was in total darkness. And so the Abba ordered them to light a bonfire, so I can see the village and my hosts can see me. And then I proceeded to pitch my tent between the huts of his two wives, Tawi and Masule. And Tawi, by the way, at that stage was pregnant with a man who was to become the next Abba. All the emblems of authority in Borana, he is wearing on this picture. From Kalecha to Balguda to Ororo to Licho to Boku. All these are emblems of power which I have found are identical and have the same function as those in the kingdom of Kush in the Sudan. And I showed it to a professor from the Sudan, and he said, please, please, please give me the two pictures so I can take it home and show it to people. So that's in the works. And I'm not the only one who's working on this problem. There's also a professor of linguistics at Haramaya University, Dr. Dereje Birbirso, who's been working on the linguistic connections between Oromo language and the language of Meroe. What's happening here? Okay, among the people who are most important during my fieldwork, first is Jaldes Liban. Second is the gentleman on the left, who's Guyoboru, who was then a retired Abba. And he and the man next to him, Adidida, were in the election context, which I recorded in 1963. It was an intense election contest, which I recorded over a period of 3 months. Adidida was a hated figure. People didn't like him, but he was powerful, he was outspoken, he was eloquent, and he ended up winning the office, and people resented that. This is the picture of Madagalma. He was the Abdullah who organized a campaign to drive the Marrahan Somali out of Lebanon, because the Marrahan Somali had penetrated deep inside Lebanon. And he organized an army of 1,000 men, 500 in cavalry, many of them armed with modern weapons, and was very successful in driving the Marrahan Somali out. The whole reason for the military organization of the Borana is because they were confronted by two invasive peoples. One is the Somali, and the other are the Maasai of Kenya. The Maasai of Kenya invaded all the way to Borana, Ethiopia, and another Abba Gada in the late 19th century drove them out of Ethiopia and deep inside Kenya. This is Ararora Mata, who was my teacher, my mentor, and a great man of learning. Much of what we know about Gada came straight from his brain, and he is an incredible, incredible man. The chart that Gambachu Magarsa showed you this morning is a chart that shows the organization of the Gada chronology, which covers 360 years, the minimum version of it. And that is organized like a spreadsheet, like a chart. On the top are the succession of Lubas who came to power, and vertically is the succession from father to son. And Ararora Mata describes that, the first one as Akka Makabasa Wali Rafudani, how the Makabasa succeed each other from one Gada to the next. And then he has the columns organized, and that's called Akka Makabasa Wal Alani. So how they succeed each other every 40 years. On top of that is superimposed a cycle of seven Makabasa Luba, and that cycles through the entire system by a pattern of permutation. Permutation is a mathematical concept which they use to organize the Gada chronology. And if you make a mistake, the cell remains empty. You do not collapse the chronology. You're not allowed to do that. So that is the beauty of the Gada chronology. The next picture is my picture at the age of 31. Engaged first in conducting research, driving a Land Rover rented from the University College of Addis Ababa, and has the label on it, Addis Ababa University College, Bamarinya. On the other side, it's in English. Well, at this stage, I was Erro. Erro in the sense that I was of that age, but I was Erro in spirit, because I wrote, at the end of my book, after doing all the analysis of the Gada institution, I wrote a chapter titled an essay, postscript, an essay in protest anthropology. And what I was protesting was the fact that anthropology and so much of social science was really developed to service the colonial governments of the world. And so how do we, as African scholars, proceed to apply the science that they developed for their own benefit without transmitting all the prejudices that are built into these traditions, intellectual traditions? And so what I try to do at the end of my book is to say, all right, we now understand what their science is, which was designed for their own benefit, and how do we turn it to something that is going to be of service to us. And so the postscript was designed to say where they really fouled the science in order to portray the institutions from the perspective of their own values. So what's happening here? Okay, is this the next one? Okay. Okay, I have a picture of a strikingly beautiful Borana woman. And Boran are very appreciative of beautiful women, and they sing endless songs about them. praising their beauty. Incidentally, women are respected, wives are respected, but the Garayu, the mistress, is the one that they really sing songs about. So this woman was that famous, and she didn't want her picture to be taken, so I had to get permission from her husband in order to take the picture. Now I have another very sad picture of a woman, a mother, who was in the middle of the famine of 1973, and she was doing something amazing. They had settled in a camp organized by the Catholic Mission, and they were getting food, minimum food, for their survival. And she was feeding her 3 children and her sick husband, but not feeding herself. And this is incredible. Usually, when famine arrives, it's the children that starve first, in most of Africa. Here, it's the mother that starves because she gives up her own life in order to keep her children and her husband alive. A woman saw this, a Gabra woman, came to the village and shouted at the top of her voice, "Ollakana borantitin kabu. Ollakana borantitin kabu." This village has no morality. And that really disturbed the community. They were divided into 2 halves. One half saying, "We are all poor, how can we feed anybody?" And the other half saying, "Under all circumstances, if you have any food left, you have to share it with those who are poorer than you are." And so that debate went on for quite some time, and in the end they made peace, and they said, yes, all of us will have to pitch in and feed a person like that. But of course, by the time they came to that decision, she was dead. Okay, I have a picture of one plant. I've made a study of, after I finished my study of Gada, I went on to study the adaptation to environment of the pastoralists. The highland pastoralists who are Borana, who live in a very rich environment, and the lowland pastoralists who are living in a pure desert environment and are camel herders. And the camel herders have survival strategies which are stunning. They know 400 plants by name, and they can describe them. They can tell you exactly the value of each plant. And I collected all those plants and pressed it and sent it to herbaria around the world, and had them identified. And it is really incredible how much knowledge they have and how well they can survive the worst disasters. In this particular disaster, my informant was Ali Doti, showed me how they survive, and they do that by collecting a plant called safarra, which is a tiny plant about this long, and with 3 tiny leaves on it and shiny trunk, and it looks like nothing. And then they dig it from under the ground, and it is about this thick in diameter and about this long in length, and it's full of nutrition and that you can drink by squeezing it out, or you can slice it up and eat it. So humans eat it, but they also feed it to their animals when it is really disastrous, when they're about to die. And so when they begin to die, they do triage. They decide which animals are going to survive. Those that will not survive, they will not be fed. They'll just let them die. Those that are going to survive, they decide to feed them, but it's a very special way of feeding them. Ali Doti, the man, slices the plant and fills about a third of a barrel full of this rich food. And he stands in front of the barrel. His wife stands behind him, and the goats are in front of him. They are released. They can smell the food, and so they rush full speed ahead toward him. And he stands in front of them with a long stick and beats them back. Only the ones who break through that barrier get fed. Only the ones that have the will to live will get fed. So what they're doing is Darwinian selection. I mean, it is an amazing idea. that you feed only those who will survive, and that way, at the end of the drought, he ended up with all his goats and all his camels, and all the cattle and all the sheep were dead, because the cattle and the sheep are grazers. They live on grass. When the drought progresses, all the grass is gone. So the sheep and cattle have nothing to feed on. But the goats and camels can still feed on the trees, the acacias, if they can reach it. So what they do is they help the goats to climb up to the tree to get fed. That way they can live through any drought, because acacias never die, even in the worst of droughts. Okay, so much for that. Now to the real topic of today. That is the new book, which is right here. It's called Gada, and Democratic Institutions of the Boran Oromo, 46th anniversary edition. It's 46 years between that and the first edition. The back of it has the stars of Borana, the Urji Daha, and at the bottom the pillars that were discovered in Kenya, in Turkana country, that show pillars whose meaning were completely unintelligible to archaeologists in Kenya, because they were unlike any of the monuments that Oromo built, which are gravestones. The gravestones are big slabs of stone, decorated and vertical. These ones are straight, thin, and tilted in different directions. So they couldn't figure out what this was, until two archaeologists from Michigan State University came and read my book and said, aha, these must be pointing at the sky to tell us where a star is located at the time of its conjunction with the moon. And he measured all of them, and they were accurate to 1 degree. 1 degree most of us cannot even see. These pillars were accurate to 1 degree. And then they found bones in one of the sites, and the bones were dated by radiocarbon dating. And it turned out that the age of these pillars is 1,000 some years. Actually, it's 300. They're dated 300 BC. 300 before Christ means right in the middle of the Aksumite period. It's right in the middle of the kingdom of Kush period. In fact, the peak of the kingdom of Kush. And so because of that, my mind was sort of triggered by this and said, well, what can we find about that would link the Borana to the kingdom of Kush? And I found that all the emblems of power, as I was saying earlier, are identical to the emblems of power in the kingdom of Kush. One of the most interesting part of that is that the kalecha is a unique emblem of power. Most people have some kind of a crown. The Egyptians have big crowns, but they have only a forehead emblem. And that's exactly the same thing that happened in Kingdom of Kush. The leaders of the Kingdom of Kush never wear crowns. They only wear a forehead emblem, which has a cobra on the front. It is tied, it's knotted at the back, and then you have two, they call them streamers in Egyptian archaeology, two tails of the kalecha that go right down to the waist. And so I tell my friends, if you want to photograph an Abba Gada, photograph him from front and back, because the back tells a bigger part of the story. It is identical to what's happening in Egypt and Kingdom of Kush. Okay, now to the real topic of today. I've used up quite a lot of time. And the topic is this. It's what can we do with this institution, this great institution that we admire so much? We can put it on a pedestal and admire it and use it as a kind of a museum piece, but that's not really a very useful way of benefiting from this magnificent institution. And so my thought is, why not think about the future? Take Gada as we have understood it and ask ourselves the question, what can we do to make it a modern institution, a 21st century institution? Well, Gada has lots of problems. Before we can begin to use it, we have to repair some of the damage. One of the damage is that women are completely excluded from the Gada institution. So whatever shape it takes, when we're done with it, we have to make sure that women are equal partners with men. The other dysfunctional feature is that the founders of the Gada institution, early 16th century, maybe earlier, calculated the duration of a generation wrong. You know that in Tulama, in Metra, and most other parts of Oromia, they say, Afurtama Abakoti, Afurtama Abakoti, the 40 years of my father. They believe that the generation is 40 years. We know that the generation is not 40 years, it's closer to 25 years. So they overestimated the length of the generation. And so because of that, there's a process of degeneration that is built into the institution, whereby people are born too early or too late for the stage of life that they're in. So by the time they reach Gada, the 6th grade, the rulers, they should be age 40 to 48. All of them should be. But they aren't. They are 0 to 48. Because babies are being born into every Gada at every stage of life. This is the most dysfunctional aspect of Gada. I have a simple solution to this. The institution was, to begin with, an age-set system. It was based purely on age, not on generation, when they created it. But sometime in the 16th century, they were facing a population crisis. The population of Oromo was expanding at an incredible rate. What they did was they imposed limitations on childbirth by postponing the age at which you can begin to raise children. So adolescence, the time when people can have a child, is around 15. And they said, you cannot have a son until you reach age 40, and you cannot have a daughter until you reach age 48. If you impose those rules on any population, the population would collapse. It didn't in Oromia because the population was growing at an incredible pace. So they did 3 things with population. 1, they expanded to new territory. 2, they changed their mode of existence to be more efficient in their exploitation of the territories that they went to. They came to Jimma and became farmers, and they went to Wallaga and became farmers too. And so they adapted to the new environment, but they maintained the control of the population. As I was saying yesterday, Ethiopia as a whole is going through a population explosion. When I started my research, there were 15 million people in Ethiopia. Now there are 100 and some million. Now that cannot be sustained unless people begin to think about limiting population. The Canadians did it, the Chinese did it, a lot of nations have done it. Ethiopia is still not thinking about that. They're thinking how wonderful it is that the population is growing so fast. Well, the environment is not going to be able to support the population if you keep growing at this rate. So I would say do what the Oromo did in the 16th century, set limits on population. Okay, now what can we do with Gada to make it a workable institution? Restructure it so that it becomes a strict age-set system, so that people are born into the 1st grade, they are 0 to 8 years old. By the time they reach Gada, the 6th grade, they are 40 to 48 years old. By the time they finish Gada, they are 88 to 88 years old. So people are exactly of the age that they should be at each stage of the life cycle. This is a fairly simple solution. And I wouldn't recommend it for the traditional society, because they found a way of living with it. And they have lived with it for 500 years. So I wouldn't want to tamper with that. But if you want to create a modern institution, then you would have to restructure the Gada system to make it a viable political system demographically. So once the transformation has taken place, the Gada would consist of two separate. Oh no, sorry. I'm now going to start talking about what the effect of this is on the structure of the Gada assembly. The Gada assembly consists of two parts: Ya Arbora and Ya Arbora and Batu. Arbora are the people of the appropriate age who are selected to become the leaders. They are the top age group. From 0 to 48, they select only 40 to 48 to serve as the leaders. So all the leaders are within that age span. Batu is the people who have been prematurely retired and disenfranchised. They have no power. They have no part in the political system. It's not just women who are excluded. It's also all the prematurely retired, called Ilman Jarsa, who are out of the system. So Borana have found a way of bringing them back into the system by allowing them to elect leaders who are called Hayu Garba. Hayu Garba become the juniors council that works with the senior council jointly to become the leaders of Borana. Now, the restructured Gada in the proposed system is this. In the restructured Gada institution, the Luba age cohorts, the whole populations, males and females, participate fully. They are all born into the first grade and go through every stage of the life course at the appropriate ages. None are prematurely retired. There will be no need to abandon children who are born too early, the children of the Rabba who have historically been abandoned. None will be in that state. That solves the perpetual structural dysfunction of the Luba. Now, what can the new Gada institution look like if it were designed to function as a modern institution? I have two charts that will show that. One is that the life course would be the same essentially as it is in the traditional society. I think you have the two charts, do you? Well, anyway, the charts are available on the wall as well. So they go through all the stages of life, but they do so at the appropriate age, with some modifications. The educational system has its own 8-grade system. So if you're going to educate your children all the way from elementary to university, the first 30 years are taken up by that grade system, so they would have to follow that, but with some modifications. The initiation of the Luba is the most important event in the life of a young person. Every individual is initiated to become a member of the Luba. It is a very intensive experience, but once they are initiated into Luba, that is an association that continues for life. You are a member of the Luba for life. That is the most powerful socializing medium that Oromo have. Nobody is excluded from the system. Nobody is left behind. Nobody is isolated. Wherever you go, you have a member of your Luba who will be there to support you. And so that component has to be kept in the new system if you're going to have the same power that Gada had in the past. Other than that, another change that has to be made is this. Oromo had 12 years of life devoted to warfare. That is way too much time to devote to warfare. If the nation is peaceful or is going to become peaceful, it has already become peaceful, then it would be necessary to reduce military service to just 2 years. 1 year of training, 1 year of service. But in the style, I'm recommending the style of Swiss military organization, where people are trained, they are given weapons, and they go home with their weapons, which are locked securely, and they are ready to go to war if it ever becomes necessary. So you can have a big army, but not a standing army. A standing army is a drain on the national treasury. It's a waste of resources. It's highly trained soldiers in great numbers, fully trained, fully armed, waiting for the next war to happen. And that's a terrible way to utilize human resources. Whereas the Swiss system says, no, train people and then let them go back to their normal lives, but train every year. They get upgraded with their training. And then if war breaks out, you have literally the entire population, in the case of the Swiss, the entire male population, ready to go to war. That is how the Swiss avoided getting involved in the First and Second World Wars. When the Germans realized that the Swiss are fully armed and will fight you in the mountains door to door, they said, no, we'll go around these people and conquer the other countries instead. So it's a way of securing safety, but at the same time, being ready to defend yourself if that becomes necessary. So I recommend that for Eritrea. I'll recommend it for any African nation. It is the thriftiest way of defending yourself without wasting huge sums of money in keeping a professional army armed and ready to go to war, but there's no war to go to unless you provoke it yourself. So the flow of the life course I've already described. Now the structure of the institution, what would it look like if we reorganize the whole system? Well, we have no choice about the independent judiciary. It has to be at the top of the system as a basis of the rule of law. But it should be truly independent, as opposed to the kind of Supreme Court that we have now in the United States, which is split by political party and accountable to the two political parties. So I would say adopt the Supreme Court system, but make it truly independent. Then there would be Gumi. Gumi in Borana has huge range of functions. It is really a complex of institutions. So what I've done here is I've broken it up into components that I can recognize in the traditional system, but I give them all separate functions. One of the most important functions of the Gumi is making peace. Making and preserving peace. Borana were distinguished as having made a confederacy consisting of 5 peoples, of which 2 are Somali clans, Ajuran and Ngari, who were assimilated by the Borana, which is incredible. Nobody ever assimilates Somalis. They are impossible. Here they've been assimilated, they've become bilingual, they are Boran and Somali speaking, and they pay tribute to the Kalu, and they agree a defense agreement to fight, to support each other. That went right through the 19th century until the British came into power. And they deliberately broke it up because they knew that Borana, with their 4 allies, are a very powerful force in Kenya. And so they negotiated with Emperor Menelik about how to deal with the Borana. Emperor Menelik put his foot down and said, Borana are Ethiopians. We have Borana right here next to us, just east of Gojam. We have Karayu right below them. Karayu are part of Borana. They are brothers. There's no way that you can have Borana as a Kenyan people. So they declared, they made a treaty to say Borana are an Ethiopian tribe. All the others are British tribes. So Gari became Gari, Ajuran, Gabra, all became British tribes. So the boundary fell between Borana and their allies. So the confederacy fell apart. So going down the list of items on the new chart, structure of the polity. How much time do I have, Ulani? Huh? 8 minutes? Okay, that's good. So the structure of the institution would now look like this.
Uh, uh, the Gada Assembly itself is the executive body, so there's not a lot that we want to change with that, except the fact that the leaders of the Gada Assembly are 6 men, not 1 man. The Abba Gada is only first among equals. He is the chairman of the group, and he was elected for that purpose. Opposite to that is Chafe, which is an assembly of lawmakers. So I took the term from Tulama and Mecha and decided that could be the one particular function that was part of Gumi, but is separate enough to stand on its own. So Chafe and Gada would be the 2 co-equal branches of government which are counterbalanced with each other. They oversee each other. They regulate each other. So the system of checks and balances in Borana is built partly on the division of power between Gada and Chafe. Now, below that is Raba. Raba are warriors, but now they've been reduced in the extent to which they participate during their lifetime. Then I have a separate section at the bottom of the chart. That separate section is a very important part of the way Oromo, Borana specifically, view the relationship between the sacred and the profane, the sacred and the secular. They call them Warrakalu and Warraboku. Warraboku are warriors. They rule the country. They fight. They defend the nation. They bear arms. Warrakalu are sacred. They never bear arms. They can't kill anything, not even a fly. They never utter words that reflect violence. Death is violent, so they don't say somebody died. When the Kallu dies, they say, Anchuflik imse. He swallowed his saliva. So that's a devious way of saying he died. Or if cattle die, they say Kabbate, meaning that dead animals are blown up. So they say, instead the word death, they will not be pronounced. So it's same thing for like Billa, the knife. The word for knife is Suluda in this language. So there's a whole language of ritual, which is sacred, and it's called Afanseda. And people, while they are in ritual, cannot pronounce those words of violence. So the ritual segment of society is totally peaceful and is devoted to peacemaking, to blessing, to maintaining a peaceful relationship between themselves and everybody else. Whereas the Warraboku side of the picture, they carry arms, they can inflict punishment, and some of the punishment they inflict are very, very severe. So there's a lot of organized, legitimate violence in their lives. Historically, the way they punish, there is no crime in Borana. There's no homicide in Borana. There's no record of a Borana killing another Borana throughout the colonial period in Ethiopia and in Kenya. That's a very unusual characteristic. So it is prohibited for a Borana to shed the blood of another Borana. So when they have to execute a criminal who has committed some kind of a crime, they do it by a traditional method called Hama Mudamuddi. Hama Mudamuddi is a way of punishing a criminal without shedding his blood. And they do that by beating the man in all the vulnerable parts of the body to cause internal bleeding and death. It's a very painful way of death, but it's a scary way of death, so it is also something that limits people from even contemplating of committing a crime. So the separation between the top and bottom of the chart is this: separation between the sacred and the profane. The top part is sacred. The bottom part is devoted to Warrakallu and Wakefata and hopefully all the religions of Oromia, Christianity and Islam. And I'm suggesting that we bring all of them together to perform one function, to decide what the ethical standards should be for the nation, and to see to it that they live by those ethical standards. So that group doesn't exist, really, in the traditional system. Although they do everything that I say, there's no one group with a specific name that performs that. So I decided to borrow a word from the Abba Gada. When the Abba Gada addresses the Gumi, 1,000 people are gathered. He cannot be heard. What he says has to be projected to the rest of the people. So how do they do that? They have people with powerful voices called Onko Abba Gada, the throat of the Abba Gada. So I borrowed the word Onko and turned it into Onko Gumi, the voice of the people, the voice of conscience. That would be the medium through which people can criticize their government and do all the things that are difficult for politicians to do. I argue that politicians cannot be trusted to oversee their own actions. So there has to be a non-political body, spiritual body, whose main function is to do all the things that politicians normally mess up. And what are these? And I'm looking at the American as well as the Ethiopian political systems here. Election monitors. Elections has been one of the big stumbling blocks for Ethiopia. Mircha was a big disaster. People manipulating the election process to benefit their own side. So how can we trust politicians to oversee elections and do it fairly, because they are going to either benefit or lose by the results of the election. So election monitors would be one. Corruption watch is another. Voting districts, I'm taking this from, Ethiopia too. The voting districts are modified to fit the political interests of a particular regime. So the manipulation of districts should not be left in the hands of politicians, but given to the spiritual body, so they can be. The power to write up the ethical standards that will govern the state should be written not by the politicians, but by the spiritual leaders. And then beyond that, there should be a way for people to criticize government, and then the criticism can be elevated to formal petitions, and formal petition can be elevated to referenda. And if you go up to the referendums, it means that people can write laws when the lawmakers are not fulfilling the desire of the people. They can write the laws. So that part of it would be the big function. So in addition to all this, I have a place also for the press corps, which should be free and independent at the bottom of the chart. So this would be the outline of a hypothetical government, which I'm dreaming about. But unless we imagine where we want to go, we want to be able to achieve anything. So I'm just imagining things and hoping that these ideas will be food for thought for political leaders and for intellectuals to think this through and come up with a system that is going to be workable for the 21st century. Thank you.
let's go ahead and give a big applause to Professor Asmarom. And also to the previous panelists, which gave us, a wonderful presentation. Please, another applause. The president wants to say something. No? All right. Before we go to our next panel, we want to announce and invite you, each one of you, to come early tomorrow morning. We have a special guest, the mayor of Finfinne, Engineer Taklehuma, will be here. So, and that will happen early at the beginning. So, please come. So I would like for the third panel, indigenous and modern approaches to legal reform, conflict resolution, and reconciliation. I would like to invite the panelists to come to the front, and Abba Takle, Adjwari Ali, Honorable Godana Adoyo, Dr. Alamu Disasa, Biyaoromo Nigatu Kasa, and the moderator, Dr. Frihowat Alito. Please come forward. All right. Okay, please, let's keep quiet. Our presenters are here and they're almost ready, so and let's keep our voice down, please. Thank you. It will come over. Okay, the panelists are here. I would like the panelists to really be mindful of time, and so that we be out of here on time. Thank you.
Akkam jirtu? Akkam jirtu? Nagaamu? Jirtu? Baganuu jiraattanii baganuu nagaannuu dhuftanii baay'ee gammadeera ani gama kootiini. Foolii wayiitu natti dhaga'amaa jira. Foolii bilisummaa. dhugaa kooti foolii bilisummaan natti natti urgaa jira. I feel that. That's a real feeling. Our next panel will be on indigenous and modern approach to legal reform, conflict resolution, and reconciliation. I just want to say something on the main objective of this panel. As you all know, conflict and violence is inevitable anywhere in the world. So societies in the world have been practicing various conflict resolution mechanisms, and the socio-cultural norms and values that are embedded in the indigenous institutions have also remained as an integral part of every society. And Oromo society is one of this kind of society. So the main objective of this panel is to explore experiences and the role of indigenous and modern approach to legal reform, conflict resolution, and true reconciliation, I say. So we had five presenters in this panel. For the interest of time, I will introduce them all panelists at once and briefly. The first panelist is Abba Takle. He is a lawyer by profession. Abba is an Amnesty International human rights researcher for Ethiopia and